ora everyone, and welcome to this webinar on exploring agri-tech opportunities in India. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Kylie Hurumia. I am the Growth and Transformation Manager at AgriTech New Zealand. For those of you that don't know us, what are you doing? We are the awesome independent industry body. Our job is to connect, to promote, and to advance this ecosystem that we have. And I would love to thank those members of ours that have dialed in. Thank you very, very much for your ongoing support. It is greatly appreciated. So this webinar today, one of the things that we were asked, why India? And to be fair, we have had queries over the past 6 to 12 months from people who, I know it's more curiosity. It wasn't necessary that they were going to jump into the market, but they just wondered what was the potential. And we've been really lucky to have used this opportunity now to bring a person who is just a fount of knowledge that is going to be able to give you an overview of what you could expect. So this webinar is a bit of two halves, a game of two halves, as they say. The first half is going to be our expert, Hemendra, who is going to take you through the overview. And the second half, our CEO, Brendan O'Connell, is going to jump in there for a bit of a fireside chat and a Q&A. Anyone who has questions throughout, please drop them in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen, and we will try and answer them as we go through. So I think I'll start with introducing our guest speaker today, who is Hemendra Mathur. He is, we were discussing earlier, there's 28 years of knowledge in Hemendra's head there, which we can't cover obviously in 90 minutes, but we're going to give it a really good go. Hemendra is his experiences in the venture capital space and investment, has invested in sort of, startups and growth stage agri-tech companies, is also currently working as a venture partner for Bharat Innovation Fund, and is the co-founder of ThinkAg, which is a platform for accelerating the adoption of innovations in agriculture, which is another great topic that we certainly love. Hemendra, thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. Greatly appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. And yeah, for just, answering the call from a couple of crazy Kiwis who thought, hello, can you talk to us, Hemendra?
Thank you. Thanks, Kylie. Thanks, Brendan, for this wonderful opportunity to talk to friends in New Zealand. Probably my first time. So really thankful for this lovely opportunity. And I've heard so much about New Zealand. I've never been there, but I hope it's a great start. And we can start building bridges between India and New Zealand, especially when it comes to AgriTech. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely.
And let me know when can I share my presentation.
Oh, yep, go ahead. And everyone watching, this is the start of a wonderful relationship between us now. So you were here first at the time, and I'm sure it'll be a long-lasting one. So go for it, Hemendra. You can jump into your presentation.
Sure, thank you. So I'll just share my screen. I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, it is.
Great. Okay, so once again, thanks for this lovely opportunity to talk to you. It's a very brief presentation as we decided to keep it more interactive, so I won't take more than 15 minutes to finish it off. But the whole idea is to give you an overview of what's happening in Indian agri-tech, how it is evolving, what are the problems that Indian agri-tech is trying to address, and a little bit idea about how this funding landscape is shaping up when it comes to investment into agriculture. Right. So I would say if you look at the history of Indian agri-tech, it's about 10 odd years old, though innovations in Indian agriculture has been happening for decades. I don't know whether you heard about Green Revolution in India that happened in 60s and 70s, which essentially drove the food security. Then in 80s and 90s, we had White Revolution, which was essentially to streamline the milk supply chain, right? That was a watershed moment for the Indian dairy industry. And then we had multiple innovations on the way, impacting multiple sectors, including fisheries, oilseeds, etc. But all of these innovations were led by the government. I think what is unique about Agritech, it is led by the startups. And that's the most fascinating part of the whole Agritech ecosystem. And, when this whole ecosystem started about 10 years back, I saw this bunch of entrepreneurs who were trying to solve problems for agriculture. Interestingly, not many of them come from agriculture background. They usually come from tech background. So that was sort of my start of the journey. Also, I said, hey guys, you don't know anything about agri, and you are looking at solving challenges in such a complex sector. They said, look, guys, we have tech with us. We have a tech lens, and we believe that tech can solve for majority of challenges that agriculture is facing. So that's how this Agritech started, and it's been a great journey since then. We have over 3,000 plus Agritech startups in the country. At least 50% of them are beyond proof of concept stage. Investment in Indian Agritech is approximately $3 billion. Not a very large amount, but having said that, not a small amount either, because it's relatively new. A lot of investors who never invested in agriculture have started to warm up to Agritech. And we are seeing a very good investment momentum going on, especially from the pandemic days. It is really picking up very fast. What is Indian Agritech all about? Interestingly, more than 95% is digital tech. It is very different from what you see in Israel, what you see in Europe, and even what you see in US. Of course, you guys can guide me on what is it in New Zealand. But when it comes to India, I think it is digital technologies which is really driving Agritech to another level. I'll talk about them as we progress. Having said that, there is also an interest among entrepreneurs as well as investors to invest in more agri-biotech, agri-deep tech, nutrition tech. So those are also emerging areas and thankfully diversifying the scope of Indian Agritech. Interestingly, a lot of Indian startups, though they're relatively early in their journey, are looking at overseas markets, right? Especially the markets which are dominated by smallholder farmers. So I don't know how much you know about Indian agriculture. We have about 150 million farmers in India, which support 50% of India's population, by the way, right? So these are large numbers, I know, when you compare with New Zealand. But it's a large farming population. Most of them own less than 2 hectares of land. So it's a very small and fragmented farm holding in India. So if you have to solve for agriculture, you should be solving for the problems of smallholder farmers, right? Because that is a large percentage of the universe. And when you're solving for them, you're building solutions which are also relevant for other countries which are dominated by smallholder farmers. So countries like, especially the African countries, most of the countries in South Asia, Southeast Asia, China, and some of the Latin American countries. I think a lot of Indian Agritech solutions are going to these places. And likewise, it's very heartening to see a lot of global startups looking at Indian market from all over the place, not just the US, not just European, even I think quite a few from Australia also looking at Indian market. So I think it's great start in a way to build these kind of global Agritech corridors, which can help us scale these solutions and solve for challenges for farmers, which are very more or less similar across geographies, right? So that is another important point I want to mention. And the reason it is important because in most other startup ecosystem in India, whether it is fintech, e-commerce, SaaS, a lot of players have really copy-pasted models from what is happening in Silicon Valley. I think Agritech to that extent is very unique. We are writing our own script, right? So that's really beautiful. And that's why we also see multiple pivots what you start with, you don't end up with that solution. You end up pivoting 3 times to 5 times. That's very normal among startups who are solving problems for Indian agriculture, because you are also figuring out how to scale, how to monetize, and things like that. Lastly, I think very, very important point I want to mention, that there is a lot of policy support for startups in Indian agriculture. Government really sees innovations as the key driver for growth of agriculture in India, and there are fantastic initiatives taken by the government, especially building digital public goods that for agriculture. There are multiple digital public goods which are under works. AgriStack, Soil Stack, Weather Stack, Water Stack, fantastic, which is essentially digitizing a lot of data in a form which can be standardized and shared with the decision makers, be it farmers or value chain players, and make their decision making far more efficient. And the biggest challenge for anyone reaching out to farmer is the cost and the transaction cost of the first mile and the last mile access to farmers. So what these digital public goods are essentially trying to solve for is reduce that transaction cost for anyone who's giving loans to farmer, for anyone who's buying from farmers, for anyone who's selling to farmers. That's where government comes into picture, and they're also supporting a lot of startups through incubation, acceleration, investing into venture capital funds, which in turn invest into agriculture. So this is a sort of a broad overview where we stand today. In terms of the ecosystem, of course, it's been I would say, journey of about 10 odd years, but I must say a lot of credit for growth of Indian agri-tech goes to multiple institutions who have worked hard in building it, especially the universities, the incubators supported by the government, and even by the private sector, that has really created a good deal pipeline for investors. They've also built a strong mentoring network, especially for the startups who are relatively early stage. So that's how it's sort of getting evolved. And then acceleration programs, which is essentially helping startups to go to market, commercialize, monetize, pivot. That has also played a very, very important role. Corporates, a lot of agribusinesses, large agri input companies, Indian companies, multinational companies, food processing companies. I think they are also very, very clear that the most of the innovation that they're going to drive is going to come from their own ecosystem. And that's why they're very open to partnership with agri startups. Most corporate have some dedicated team or some sort of strategy to work with startups in this space. This is what we do at ThinkTech, drive partnership between large corporates and startups to scale these solutions. Large corporates typically have good sort of, I would say, credibility and trust among farmers, which usually young startups don't have. But young startups bring the entrepreneurial energy, some innovative solutions. So it's a very interesting sort of marriage between large corporates and some emerging, evolving startups to jointly solve for farmer challenges. Another important thing in Indian agri-tech is village ecosystem, especially the grassroots organization, the farmer producer organizations. As I said, most of the farmers are small. They probably don't understand technology. And if I'm a startup sitting out of Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, I go to them and tell guys, this is how we are going to solve for it. They're unlikely to trust me, right? And that's where this local village entrepreneurs, people who are really sort of based out of villages, who are working with farmers in some capacity, they are an important bridge and conduit for a lot of these innovations to flow to make it accessible to the farmers. I talked about digital platforms. If you have time, please do Google AgriStack. It's very interesting digital public good. If I talk about it, I'll exhaust another 1 hour just talking about it, because this is very close to my heart. So I won't get into detail, but this is essentially digitizing the farm ID, the farmer ID, and the crop ID. So with the click of the button, you know who the farmer is, where is he or she located, how big is the farm area, and what he or she is growing. So it's phenomenal amount of information which is accessible with the click of a button. This is still under development, but a fantastic DPG, which I'm sure will be adopted by many other countries, not just India. Lastly, investors, as I mentioned, thankfully, we have a large base of investors who are interested to invest in agriculture. Many of them are global investors, many in India. And thankfully, we have investors right from seed stage to pre-series A to series A, B, and all the way to late stage. So there is thankfully enough appetite among investors to invest in the sector. So big question, what are we solving for? And that's where thankfully there is no dearth of problems in agriculture area, especially in India. So there are like many problem statements. But if I have to pick few, the top of the heap, essentially solving for farmer access to good quality inputs like fertilizer, like agrochemical, like seeds, like good equipments, products for cattle nutrition, things like that. I think that is where a lot of startups are working. It is essentially, I would say, prescriptive selling, where you end up capturing a lot of data from the farm, from the soil, from crop health parameters, and you make a prescription to farmer. Hey guys, if you use this product, you're likely to get better yield, productivity would improve, you can save your crop against pest attack and things like that. So very, very data driven selling. It's not like buying on Amazon. It's very different. So I think that's another important intervention that a lot of these startups are making. And one important thing I want to point out, that a lot of agri input products that are sold in rural India, many of them are spurious, right? So through these channels, they're not just making sure that the products are sold as genuine, but they're also sold at the right price at the right time. So that is what these guys are trying to solve for. Second theme is around farm to fork market linkages. You'll be surprised if you don't know that between farmer and the consumer, there are about 6 to 8 intermediaries, right? So typically, a lot of products, get wasted, a lot of costs get built up, and the whole agriculture supply chain continue to remain supply driven. So these startups who are essentially connecting markets with farmers are trying to make it demand driven, capturing demand from different kind of buyers. It could be institutional buyers, it could be your kirana stores, mom and pop kirana stores, it could be modern trade, it could be horeca, it could be e-commerce, it could be quick commerce, and work back towards build tech-enabled supply chain to cater to the demand. This is one of the most funded themes. 80% of the money which has come into Indian agri-tech has gone into farm to fork solutions. Then data and advisory is essentially capturing data from multiple sources. It could be satellite imagery, it could be mobile phones, it could be drones, it could be sensor, IoT devices, and building solutions and decision-making tools, not just for the farmers, but for a lot of value chain players. In fact, a lot of data monetization for these startups happened from the value chain players, not necessarily farmers, especially banks, financial institutions, insurance companies who are hungry for data to build products for the farmers. Mechanization is another big opportunity in India where a lot of startups are working. Farm labor is becoming more and more scarce, and it is becoming very expensive, especially at the time of sowing, at the time of harvesting, when you need the maximum farm labor. And that's where we are seeing mechanization happening. It used to be synonymous with tractorization. Thankfully, we have many more equipments now on the farm from sowing to harvest, solving for a lot of farmers' challenges around use of labor. Then control environment agriculture. As you know, climate risks are not unique to any one country. It's a global risk now, and that we also see in India. We see sort of spells of drought, we see spells of floods, flash floods, abnormally high temperatures and stuff like that. And that's where we need to evolve and build our agriculture, which is more climate resilient. And that's where we are looking at a lot of solutions which are solving for challenges around climate, improving water use efficiency, improving energy efficiency, and using interesting sort of solutions like hydroponics, aquaponics, polyhouses, greenhouses, and multiple other solutions so that your production and sort of becomes much more predictable and become more immune to the climate risk that we all see. Lastly, very important area which is evolving is farmers' access to credit. I think that's a huge opportunity again. lot of farmers in India end up borrowing from the local money lenders who lend at about 2% to 5% per month. Who in the world makes money when the interest rates are so high? And that is where we are seeing very interesting set of agri-fintech solutions, which is sort of, helping a lot of these banks and NBFCs, non-banking financial companies, to efficiently onboard farmers, do their, ref checks, do underwriting, and sort of link credit to the end usage, and also help in loan recovery. So again, a very interesting intersection of agri-tech and fintech. Early days, and it is also regulated space because a lot of financing is regulated by Government of India. But a huge opportunity, and government is also taking proactive steps to drive agri-fintech solutions in the country. With that, of course, a very brief snapshot on the funding in the agri-tech. As I mentioned, cumulatively about $3 billion over the last 10 odd years. It really peaked during pandemic. Prior to pandemic, I think the total funding was about $500 million. But in pandemic years, we saw funding in the range of $800 million to $1 billion. It has kind of moderated a bit after that, but I'm still hopeful Indian agri-tech will continue to attract about $1 billion sort of per annum kind of investment from venture capital and private equity. I think one thing which really triggered investor interest during pandemic days, because when all other sectors were falling down, agriculture was the only sector which grew. And the digital adoption among consumers and among farmers went to another level altogether. So, of course, all of us suffered because of pandemic, but one good thing which has happened is it really accelerated digital adoption. And as I mentioned, a lot of Indian agri-tech is about digital tech. And that's why a lot of these startups focusing on digitally connecting farmers with the consumers really scaled quite a bit. And that's where investors, especially the large investors from across the globe, like Soprosa, Temasek, Sequoia, those who were not investing in agriculture started to invest in agriculture. We are yet to see a large exit. We are yet to see a large public listing, but I think it's a matter of time. I'm very hopeful in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see some interesting exits, hopefully with good returns, which can excite many more investors to come and invest into the sector. So yes, that's about it. I hope I've not taken much time. And over to you, Kylie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hemendra. I must say, you said 115 million farmers, and my brain froze. I was just, I don't know how many we've got here in New Zealand, but I'm pretty sure it's not 115 million. And I mean, yeah, so much to unpack there. And I did, before we sort of move on, I did have a question come through from, let me just have a quick look. So looking at the specific area in agriculture, you talked about organizations using satellite data. What can we expect to see in terms of coverage of agricultural areas and regions? So, for example, are there any areas covered by long-term daily weather data to drive models? So what is currently there, I suppose, is the question.
Right. No, that's a very good question. And I am personally very bullish about convergence of agri-tech with space tech. For a country like India, right? We have almost 160 million hectares of agricultural land, and it's humanly impossible to monitor the land at that scale with manual intervention, right? And that's where remote sensing come into picture. Thankfully, space tech ecosystem in India is also maturing quite a bit. And we see very interesting application of remote sensing in agriculture, especially around detecting farm boundaries, detecting the crop in the field. And the farms are really small, right? And going further, even estimating potential yield, which can come out of a farm area of 1 hectare, 2 hectares. Just imagine. Of course, they have to triangulate the satellite data with multiple other data points. But having said that, satellite data is very core to it. I can tell you that I can give you maybe one example which can clarify this whole space a bit more. I'm on a board of a company called Shore. They are into space tech with agriculture as primary use case. And they build a farm credit score. Like most of us have a credit score for ourselves, basis which banks give us loan. Now, how do you assess farm? How do you say that this farm is credit worthy, right? So that's where Shore comes into picture. They capture about 20 odd variables from the space. They triangulate the data with other variables and say, hey, this farm is like 800 out of 1,000, and it's a good farm to lend. And bankers say, guys, what is this? We haven't heard about this. And of course, a lot of banks questioned it. Look, this is something very new. We never tried it. So of course, it was a hard sell initially to banks. But then the largest private sector banks of the country started buying this data. They invested into Shore as investors. The largest credit rating agency in the country, CIBIL, which has a partnership with TransUnion, they invested in Shore. And this has become a sort of standard product. And the key driver for this is the remote sensing data. They capture this data almost on a 15-day frequency. And so it's not just the score that they give. They say also say, guys, we are also going to tell you how your crop asset is going to look like from sowing to harvest. We'll update you if there are any stress areas, if there are any areas where you need to act. So banks are super happy. So bankers who have to typically travel hundreds of kilometers to figure out that farm can do that sitting in their branch. And this has really opened up new avenues of financing smallholder farmers.
Wow. I'm thinking we probably could have invited our other members of BNZ, etc., onto this, and they would be picking up a few tools. Obviously, you just see we've for everyone watching, we've picked up a random guy who's just popped in there to who had FOMO from watching from the scenes. This is obviously our CEO, Brendan O'Connell, who is also going to ask Hemendra some of the next round of questions. So over to you, Brendan.
Thanks, Kylie, and thank you, Hemendra. What a great presentation and introduction to kick things off and give us some great insight into Agritech in India. I know both from your presentation and from some of our discussions, there's multiple reasons for sort of learning from each other, both in terms of assessing our own individual journeys and what that means as both our ecosystems evolve, but also looking for opportunities for collaboration. So please do keep the questions coming through. Rest assured, I am seeing the questions, and I'll make sure that we get to those questions in this discussion. But I did want to kick things off because from our initial conversations, Hemendra, I was very impressed by your own, genuine affinity and care for the agri-tech sector. You used language that was quite personal. You really sort of identified with the sector. Could you tell us a little bit around, how you did get involved in agri-tech, what your journey to getting here has involved, and why you have such an affinity with the sector?
Yeah, I know there is a history to it. Thanks for asking this question. So I'm an agricultural engineer. I did that in 1994. I passed out of my college, and I saw, despite me being the rank holder from the college, it was very hard to get jobs, right? Of course, I ended up joining an MBA from the top management institution, but I realized that somehow we need to bring talent and money to this sector. That's very important. That's one realization which happened to me very early on before actually I started my career. And there was a thing that I need to do something which drive the best of the talent and best of the investors to invest into this sector. Then thankfully, I joined Rabobank in 2003, and I was there for like 4 years. Rabobank, as probably you would know, is a Dutch bank, one of the largest banks in the world, focusing on dedicated to food and agriculture. And that's where I ended up working with a lot of international food and agri companies, a lot with the policymakers in India. And I clearly discovered that this sector is lagging at least 15 years behind any other sector. There is so much to do. There's so much of scope, to improve productivity, to improve, data forecasting and stuff like that. And that's where I decided that I should be focusing a bit more on this sector. I then joined a private equity fund called SEAF India Agribusiness Fund in partnership with a US-based organization. and we did invest in the food supply chain businesses, but more in SMEs, not in Agritech. SMEs, small, medium enterprises. But when I was there, I started to get these queries from these young startups that we want to build something in agriculture. We have no idea about how agriculture works, but we have done some fantastic work on the tech side. Can you help us mentor? Can you help us guide? Can you help us navigate the agri-food ecosystem? And I started as a hobby, as an extracurricular activity, spend time with these guys and say, guys, this is how probably you can solve for it, though I'm not an expert. But that kind of relationship really sort of, worked really well. And what I thought as a hobby and, like an extracurricular activity for me turned out to be, my sort of next big career move, where I, from a few handful of startups, which I could count on my fingertips, that army of entrepreneurs grew into hundreds and now in thousands. And I also thought that the best way to keep yourself, in a I would say, if you have to learn, relearn, unlearn, this is probably the best way to do it, to work with entrepreneurs. They teach you so much. I always treat them as my mentor, though they call me my mentor. But I always say, guys, I learn from you and I throw it back to you. But it's been a fascinating journey that a lot of startups trust me, not just in India, but I work with some of the global AgTech startups also. And yeah, it's all about sharing knowledge, helping guide them. I always tell them that, guys, you know what to do. I will tell you what not to do, because it's so easy to get tempted to do hundreds of things in agriculture because problems are abundant, right? If you're solving for input, you want to get into output. You are solving for output, you want to get into financing. If you're into financing, you want to get into insurance. All attractive, but you need some very different skill set to do it, and that's where it's so easy to sort of lose your focus, stuff like that. So that's what I do. Keep them focused. I tell them, each mistake you make is few $1 million and sort of some months and some years lost. So let's not do that. So this is how this journey started, and thankfully, it's been going great. I am trying to support them through multiple platforms. One is ThinkAg, which we talked about. I'm also a lot of multilaterals, foundations, corporates, not-for-profits, of course, Government of India, state governments, with a singular focus of driving innovations in agriculture. And that's why I really rely on this army of AgTech entrepreneurs. I'm really riding on their shoulders. I go and pitch to the government, guys, we can solve for it. The reason I get that confidence because I have hundreds of guys, backing me. We'll do it. Just give us an opportunity.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I can tell. Obviously, it's a very personal journey for you, and like I said, and it definitely involves connecting with a very interesting community of people when you find those entrepreneurs trying to solve problems. And I suspect, I've been in the sector for 18 years, and again, one of the sort of factors that keeps me so interested in the sector, and I can hear similar interest points and maybe values coming through from yourself, Hemendra, is that applying innovative ideas and technology entrepreneurship to something that's so fundamental as food, whether that's what that means for our own community or what that means in terms of the global challenges. So a lot of shared mission in that space. There's several questions coming through, but just obviously one of the mechanisms and one of the approaches that you've been involved in has been ThinkAg. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? You've mentioned it a few times. Can you tell us what ThinkAg does and what its aspirations would be for AgTech from India?
Sure, no, absolutely. So we started ThinkAg in 2018. There are 4 co-founders. It's a not-for-profit. And the reason we saw, look, there are a lot of guys who are interested in investing in Indian agri-tech. But the challenge is that the scale is very, very small. Yeah. That's why you end up getting some seed funding, some sort of initial check. But it is very hard to raise follow-on money. And that's when we said, how does this scale come? How do we drive scale in this sector? And that's when we realized, look, it's very hard for startups to do it on their own. The only way they can do it is through collaborations and partnerships. So that's the origin of ThinkAg. How do we drive collaborations and partnerships to drive scale? And that's where we end up connecting a lot of startups with a lot of corporates, so likes of Bayer, Syngenta, BASF, Godrej, and some large Indian agri corporates are or have been ThinkAg members. And they say, guys, we have these problem statements to solve. Can you suggest some good startups? We bring those curated startups to these corporates and they figure out some pilots, which many times convert into partnerships. And that's how these solutions scale, right? So that was one core theme of ThinkAg, drive partnerships and collaborations. And of course, we drive collaboration not just with corporate, but even with farmer producer organizations, with incubators, accelerators, investors, in some cases with policymakers. So it's kind of a sort of a bridge platform for a lot of these startups. Second, we also realized that there's hardly any research in this sector. There are hardly any data points even for investor to decide the impact of AgriTech, right? That's where we started to come up with an annual publication called ThinkAg Investment Report, and it has become a benchmark for a lot of investors to follow. It's not just the data on investment trends, but also some of the sort of qualitative sort of research that we share in terms of what are the things which are evolving, what are the challenges which still remain, stuff like that. And then we do some curated research for some of our partners. Lastly, we do a lot of events. We realize that unfortunately, everyone in this sector is working in silos. There's startup investor ecosystem, there's a corporate ecosystem, there's a government ecosystem, there's a village level ecosystem. But that is not solving the problem. We need to bring everything together. And that's where we decided that we need to drive multi-stakeholder engagements across the board, research institutions, universities, government bodies, everyone sort of can we bring them together. That's where a lot of these events helped us, So we started with, of course, in-person events. COVID happened. We did maybe hundreds of webinars on multiple themes on AgriTech during COVID. I think some of those webinars are also available on YouTube. If people are interested, they can watch it. And post-pandemic, again, we are doing a lot of events where we bring multiple stakeholders. We also do an annual ThinkAg event in Goa that's happening next month. So anyone from New Zealand want to come, it's an open invitation, 24 to 26 September, where almost...
Goa on the 24th to the 26th of September sounds pretty tempting to me, but yeah.
Yeah, I think what I can promise, the top 300 to 400 people from the industry are going to be there, right? So you will end up meeting most of them in one single location and with some really rich content coming as part of the conference, and of course a lot of networking opportunities. So of course, this is essentially to drive these sort of multi-stakeholder engagements at scale. And so that's what we do. We are also a startup. We are also learning. We can do much more. But we are 6-year-old and we will happy to engage with other like-minded organizations from New Zealand. We also did, by the way, a lot of cross-border work as part of ThinkAg, taking Indian startups to Europe. We worked with Beanstalk in Australia to drive a lot of knowledge and partnership between Australian and Indian startups. There was a delegation from New South Wales, and Australian government now is very, very active in India, talking directly to the Indian government and trying to build this AgriTech partnership. So I think efforts like that to drive cross-border and sort of opportunities, and happy to engage with you and other organizations in New Zealand. I think we can start it now. Hopefully, we can do a lot together.
Yeah, you've demonstrated that willingness just by joining us here today and the conversations that we've had already. And I think a lot of your mission and your purpose specifically through ThinkAg is something that really strikes a chord for us. I think in New Zealand, we've been able to create a really good sense of identity and belonging between different parts of the ecosystem. And it sounds like that's a big part of what ThinkAg is doing. So we look forward to some ongoing discussions. Now, there are some really good questions coming through. So maybe we'll start sort of setting the scene for answering some of those questions. And maybe we'll start with maybe looking at some impressions of New Zealand maybe first. Now, we we did agree in advance that we're not going to talk cricket. And so when I ask for sort of what perceptions of New Zealand agri-tech and sort of research skill sets do you have awareness of, or what do you think New Zealand has to offer that would be of interest to India? Let's leave the cricket out of it. But what are your perceptions of the areas that Indian stakeholders would be interested in, maybe seeking collaborations or looking for matching skill sets in some ways?
Right, Brendan. Of course, we can talk about cricket. I think all of India is passionate about how New Zealand plays cricket. We have a lot to learn from you. Kane Williamson is a household figure in India. Everyone knows him, and we always love watching India playing New Zealand. But yeah, apart from cricket, I think there's a lot more to share for sure. I think few things which I believe, of course, as I said, I've never been to New Zealand, so my knowledge will be limited in some ways. But whatever I have seen, heard from people who have worked with partners in New Zealand is, I think your expertise in some of the specific value chains, like dairy, for example. That's a large potential area for India. It's a $250 billion industry in India, and of course, we have progressed quite a bit since White Revolution. But I think New Zealand has access to best practices, best technology. We have in dairy value chain, we face a lot of challenges, especially around practices around breeding, lactation management, disease management, managing quality of milk, improving productivity of milk. Indian cows give on an average 4, 5, 10 liters a day, something like that, or even less. How do we take it to another level? So I think that's where I think New Zealand, to my knowledge, has done a fantastic job. Fonterra is a benchmark for any dairy company, not just India, but for any dairy company in the world, the way you build Fonterra. I think we can also learn how a farmer sort of driven organization be scaled. Because a lot of, all said and done, a lot of the farmers are not shareholders in the companies. Even in a lot of these agri-tech startups, it's all private shareholders. I think Fonterra is a great example of a farmer-owned, farmer-driven company which has built a scale of this size. So I think we need to learn a lot from that example, and especially dairy value chains. I think you can bring a lot of technology to India. Of course, we can learn it and we can invent it, we can discover it, but it's going to take time. So I think it's time that we engage more and figure out. So that's one thing I can think of. Another, horticulture. That's another large area large focus area for India. We produce in excess of 340 million tons of fruits and vegetables. 340 million tons. It's more than all staples put together. And thankfully, the consumption of fiber is growing at a faster pace than carbohydrates and fats. So clearly, there's a huge demand. Even for a farmer, horticulture is becoming more important because you get it's more liquid. The working capital cycles are relatively small. Your remunerations are better. A lot of smallholder farmers are taking horticulture as their main focus area now. But again, we lose a lot of produce. We waste almost 1/3 of what we produce when it comes to horticulture produce. So that's a large volume, right? And a large loss for us, for a country like India, where we have almost, more than a billion population to feed, right? So what are the best practices in managing horticulture supply chain, especially the post-harvest management? Zespri is a great example of what you did with kiwi. Can we bring those kind of practices? How to maintain the quality, how to build a brand for a horticulture produce like kiwi. That's a fantastic example.
You're speaking to sort of complete systems, I guess, when you're sort of identifying some of whether it's the cooperative and farmer approach that Fonterra has used so well in terms of supply, and then on top of it, obviously it's product development work, whether it's in the horticultural space. For us, you mentioned the branding aspect. Of course, a lot of the capabilities around those brandings is based on some pretty unique and special plant genetics. So do you think some of the opportunities are in that sort of combination of systems rather than necessarily an individual skill set? Is it, am I reading that right?
Absolutely. I think it's a sort of I think it's the systems, processes, best practices, innovations, all put together, which you have sort of developed, demonstrated at scale, and we are still learning, right? So it's not, I would say Frontier and Jasperi are just examples. I'm sure
Yes. Yeah.
there are many more.
Although I guess there are many capabilities in both of those sectors that add up to the success that's most visible through those brands or those organizations. But the research organizations, the genetic developments, the technologies on farm or orchard, I guess it's the combination. I mean, do you see particular starting points, or are there particular opportunities from any of those groups that you think might be fruitful to start with?
Yeah, I think one more point I want to emphasize here is the timing. I think it could have happened 20 years back, right? Why it did not happen. It's all about timing, right? I would say this is probably a good time for multiple reasons. I would say there's a large section of Indian population who's willing to pay for quality, right? In pandemic, we got kiwis for almost $50 each, which is unthinkable in Indian market, right? So I think the end consumer is willing to pay for good quality, good nutrition, for health, stuff like that. So, and that's where a lot of these technologies and R&D and innovation start making much more sense, because ultimately someone has to pay for it, right? So that's one. And second is the integration of food supply chain, driven by startups, driven by government initiatives. I think that's also becoming very, very common now. And third, openness of India in general to partner with other countries and drive collaboration at scale with like-minded countries. I think phenomenal. And lastly, as I said, the startup ecosystem, they're hungry for solutions. They don't want to reinvent the wheel, and they're very, very open to partnership. And so some of the Indian corporates, I think the joint ventures or whatever sort of form of partnership we can work on, I think that is all sort of coming together now. So that's why it's a good timing. What could be the starting point? I think we just need one or two good success stories. It could be in dairy, it could be in horticulture, it could be in some other sector. It could be a very small starting point here and there. This is exactly how we started with Australia, by the way, about 6 years back, right? And it has like become a big thing now. Really, we are talking at the government level now. When it comes to Agritech. So I think we need to make a start. So it could be you bringing some of the best startups or best companies. We can go thematic, we can go by certain value chains, and we can curate right kind of partners from India. We can bring them together. They can spend time together. They can go do field visit and stuff like that. So I think that could be a good starting point in my opinion. And I'm sure something will work out. I think as ecosystem partners and catalyzers and enablers, it's important for us.
Would you think in the taking the hort space as an example, is starting with knowledge exchange about actual technology practices within orchards or growing systems? And I guess I'm using the term orchards and thinking about permanent horticulture and what that means in terms of the kiwi fruit industry that you've called out, or apples and pears, that sort of permanent hort type space. Do you think is it the actual sort of technologies within those orchards and exploring where there might be shared learnings in that, or is it more the research type space and understanding, the sort of the plant genetics perspective and what's happening from a plant genetics, or is it all of the above, which is probably the easiest answer, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the easiest answer, but I think the prioritization could be different. We can start with orchard management because that's a low hanging, right? I'm assuming those practices have been tried and tested. Developing new sort of variety, new hybrid, etc., may take some time, right? Because it's very research intensive. So when we start with orchard management, I think that itself is a huge area. We grow one of the best quality of apples in the world. There are two states in the country, the hilly states, Himachal Pradesh and Jammu and Kashmir. we call them Apple economies. I think Apple is the largest source of income for these two states. Just imagine. There is so much Apple happening, but again, the same challenges, low productivity, orchards are getting aged. They're not getting replaced by newer orchards. We don't know how to do high density orchards and stuff like that, right? So that's a very important value chain. Likewise, grapes, grapes is also big focus area. Bananas, we can do much more in bananas. We, I think, grow 20% of world bananas, something like that, right? But again, productivity not that great, the quality not that great, ripening chambers are not that smart and stuff like that. So we can pick any value chain within orchard and just demonstrate this is how it works. And of course, once we start working together, we can get into more R&D driven solutions. I think that is also an opportunity.
Sorry,
That's
can I
exactly
just jump in here?
Please do, Kylie, yeah.
And I was like, I've just popped up on it and I actually had a question. I was like, oh, this is too good. You mentioned just a little bit of, did you say a third of horticultural production is lost through the process? Can you just tell me, like, where is the loss? Like, why is the loss? Because that often lends itself to what solutions could be quite useful to fix that, right? So I was just wondering how is it lost?
Yeah. So I think so first I want to clarify it is not just volume loss, it is also value loss, right? So it's not that we are just dumping something into sort of something, right? So it is also value loss. And there are multiple reasons for it. First, as I mentioned, between farmer and the consumer, there's 6 to 8 intermediaries. And most horticulture produce are perishable, right? So that's one reason. Second, I would say the storage and transportation is still not very good. The cold room infrastructure is still evolving. The cold chain gets broken. Unless you maintain the cold chain from farmer to consumer, there's no point, right? So unfortunately, it gets broken in between, right? And then, of course, I would say there are multiple handling points. The food get unloaded, loaded, unloaded multiple times, right? The packaging practices are not scientific. In a box of 20 kg of apples, you will see 30 kgs. Just imagine, right? That's very common because we sort of use so much of produce, we just kind of dump it. So I think these are small examples, right? There are over-ripened fruits, there are under-ripened fruits. Unfortunately, a lot of sorting grading happens at the consumer end. When we buy our fruits and vegetables, we sort at the consumer end, as in at a retail store, right? Instead of sorting grading happening at the point of production. So the fruit or the vegetable is traveling hundreds and thousands of kilometers to be sorted by the consumer. So these are you may laugh at it, but these are the challenges. We need to have a far better on-farm infrastructure for sorting, grading, packing, dehydration.
Yeah. It's all opportunity. It is all opportunity for companies to offer their services. I just wanted to clarify what it was and how that loss eventuated, because someone might be watching right now and go, I've got a solution for that. So thank you.
Great country for decentralized aggregation and decentralized processing. Unlike a lot of these industrial nations, which are large facilities and stuff like that, given the fragmentation of farmland, right, it's very difficult to take all the produce to a centralized location and process it. Because there's also time attached, time issue. Like in milk, a lot of bacterial count exponentially increases post milking, right? So even a few hours lost, leads to poor quality. So especially for perishable products like milk, like horticulture produce, you need to start processing at least part of it at the farm or near farm. So that's where I see opportunity for thousands and millions of units. And the beauty about that a lot of farmers can own it. Unfortunately, farmers end up selling the commodities at a time of the harvest when the prices are lowest. And that's where their share in consumer price is 30%. Just imagine, 70% is with the channel. So how do you make sure that the farmer gets a fair share, 50%, 60%? And that's not going to happen unless you start doing some bit of value addition, which is at the farm level. And that's where I think a lot of these opportunities makes a lot of sense.
Which is it's really interesting because it becomes like a systems type problem, as trying to understand all the different components that could come together. One question here that might help us unpack things a little bit differently, or actually in quite a direct way. You've mentioned the number of farmers. It's a market made up of small holdings. And when you think specifically about problems for smallholder farmers, have you got examples of where solutions or providers have been able to achieve scale? So how do you try, when there are so many individuals involved? How do you achieve other examples of how you can achieve scale in bringing solutions to that type of community?
Yeah, very good question. So I think clearly the farming community, as I mentioned, dominated by smallholder farmers. There are three ways to look at it. Driving aggregation of farm produce, driving aggregation of farmland, and driving aggregation of farmers. These are like three different ways to look at it. I think aggregation of farm produce to some extent is already happening at the government regulated market yards. And a lot of startups are actually getting into it. Using technology for, better aggregation, better storage, better demand forecasting, better price forecasting. And that's why farmers come to them and sell to these young age startups.
So they're actually aggregating a community themselves or creating a community themselves. Yeah.
2,000 tons a day. Some are doing even 4,000, 5,000 tons a day. So that's kind of scaling. I think aggregation of farmers, which is like a cooperative, that's also happened in certain value chains like milk and dairy. And I think it's happening in other value chains through this movement called Farmer Producer Organization, FP. I think that is again a very ambitious scheme by Government of India, and they're trying to aggregate farmers together. So there are economies of scale. They can buy together, they can sell together, they can process together, they can build brands and stuff like that. And there are some fantastic example of some of the FPOs building fantastic products, brands. Some are even exporting to other markets. So that's a farmer aggregation issue. The third is aggregation of farmland, which is a bit more tricky because there are a lot of laws and regulations which govern the consolidation part. In fact, the land is getting fragmented with every generation, right? So, and government has some restrictions on who can buy agricultural land, who can't, can it be converted into other forms of land, etc. So there are some restrictions out there, but I think the aggregation of farmland will also be solved by one single factor, which is need for mechanization. Because a lot of these mechanical tools don't work in 1 hectare kind of a land. If you have to fly drone, you typically don't fly a drone over 1 hectare, right? You want some 100 odd hectares to fly, right? To make it, of course, you can still fly, but if you have to make money, probably you need a larger land area, right? Likewise, if you move a tractor, if you want to do harvesting through an harvester, you need large tract of land. And whether we like it or not, farm labor is becoming more and more difficult for majority of farmers. So to me, the single most important driver for land aggregation, farmland aggregation, is this urgent need for mechanization rather than regulation or anything else. So I think that's how I am seeing this scale issue being addressed in some ways. And I'm sure startups have a huge role to play in this also.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to think that it's actually some of the Agritech startups and activities that will actually play a role in that sort of aggregation of needs or creation of communications. You mentioned labor, so there's one question here around, is there any technologies that's supporting the labor workforce? Is that something that's been solved, or are you seeing solutions coming together around, helping access to labor, supporting training, or any other sort of approaches in that area that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I think there are, in fact, interestingly, a lot of these equipments that you see, like let's say drone, for example, it cost about $10,000, right? Now, very few farmers can buy it, to be honest. So what's happening? that some of the large farmers or progressive farmers or some village level entrepreneur is buying it, and then they in turn are giving on a pay per use basis, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, you need to train hundreds and thousands of these drone guys to not not just about drone, but how to fly a drone, how to fly a drone specific to a crop, right? There are some skills involved, right? So there's this large number of drone entrepreneurs are emerging, who are trying to solve for a lot of farm mechanization issue, especially spray of agrochemical, which has started to happen through drones. So that's one example how it's not just solving for farm labor issue, but it also creating some sort of local employment opportunity for rural, and they are getting involved, and there are drone academies being built. Even government is promoting women. They're grouped together under self-help groups to own drones and fly drones. So it's interesting how we are creating capacity at the grassroots level. Likewise, I think tractor rentals is a very common thing in rural areas where a lot of these local entrepreneurs end up providing those services at a certain cost to smallholder farmers. And I'm sure a lot of these solutions which uses computers, robotics for the purpose of weeding and data collection and spraying agrochemicals, they are going to be driven more like a farming as a service, where we need these smart guys on the field to drive it, run it, make sure the asset is utilized, and there's a business model in place. So that's how sort of we are getting the rural youth involved. I think that's another challenge India has. We are seeing a lot of migration happening from rural India to urban India. Of course, we are a democratic country. Anyone can go anywhere. One can work anywhere. But the question is, can we create some meaningful livelihood opportunities for rural youth in the villages? Why they are forced to leave. They can voluntarily leave. That's not an issue. Why they're forced to leave, go to a large city and do some job which are, I wouldn't say even respectful for the kind of caliber and skill they have. So I think
Yes.
that the implication uh, of of how Agritech will benefit the rural India is
Yeah.
by these meaningful job opportunities for semi-skilled, skilled youth who can earn decent amount of living by being in village, not necessarily going to large city. So I see a huge potential as we discussed in mechanization, in things like data collection, aggregation centers, micro warehousing, micro cold storage, beekeeping, cattle management services, things like that. You'll see a lot of these village level entrepreneurs coming up and earning a decent livelihood. My personal estimate is that we're going to have 10,000 agri-tech startups in another 5 to 7 years, and that will create at least 10 million jobs in rural India. That's going to be a very, very important I would say, outcome of this
Yes.
agri revolution solving
Yeah.
for rural India.
Yeah, I agree. I can see what that importance is, and I think the New Zealand experience is quite different, but there are some relationships to it. And first of all, I'm hearing that actually the need for agri-tech to be used is actually creating some of the solutions there in terms of pulling these communities together, and creating opportunities for sharing of technology across different land blocks, and so it sounds like the actual environment is going to be changing quite a bit. So your comment on timing is very pertinent, that maybe now is the time that there are potential partners that are sort of creating pathways to be able to address access to multiple stakeholders, because there's platforms evolving, there's business practices around sharing tools that might not be justified at a smallholder level, but across a group of an FPO group or something like that. So there may be more opportunities there than and more pathways to engage than there have been in the past. One other comment as you talk about that, that sort of rural urban trajectory, and the perceptions of India, of course, is that you have an abundance of talent. The world's technology industry is being driven in many parts by what's happening in India. We see Indian CEOs ending up in all the big tech firms, and you're a powerhouse of talent doesn't seem to be a scarcity in India. How about matching that talent to real rural and agri needs? Is there still an affinity between those that have an ability to grow technology companies who understand technologies with great detail and affinity? Do they still have a linkage to productive practice on the land and wanting to help Indian agriculture? What's that dynamic like?
Very good question. Huh? Yeah, I think this is a challenge and an opportunity. Whether we like it or not, I think the intersection of big tech with agri-tech is still very limited. You rightly said, Indians had Microsofts of the world and Googles of the world, but how do we get them to work in this area? So thankfully, I'm not saying they are completely out, they're complete outsiders. Thankfully, likes of Google and Microsoft and Amazon of the world are genuinely getting interested into solving for agriculture, right? They've invested in a lot of startups. At least Google has in some of the agri startups, and there is other tech organizations who are also investing here and there. But you're right. I think we need to figure that out. What is that formula? Which is going to work. I think it's important for big tech or any tech talent to see scale, right? Thankfully, the scale visibility is there. Whatever agri-tech solutions we build, there are many solutions which have surpassed $100 million, $500 million, even $1 billion, at least on the gross merchandise value. So scale is visible. I think one challenge which remains for agri-tech vis-a-vis, let's say, other tech-driven sector is relatively low margins. Because this is a lot of interventions is around making the supply chain efficient. But still you end up with trading margins like 3% gross margin, 7% gross margin, 10% gross margins, right? Where if you look at any tech-driven organization, the gross margins are 30, 40, 60%, right? So I think that's where we need to figure out how to attract talent. Of course, some of them are, as I said, a lot of startups founders are from a tech industry. So anyway, we are attracting them, but we have to attract at scale. We need to make this industry much more attractive. We should be able to pay for the talent. All said and done, we need to pay for the talent. And that's where I think we need to figure out ways how this tech can drive not just the scale, but the profitability in the value chain, right? And that's where a lot of these interventions through value addition, through building demand-centric models, etc., has to come in. We have to, at least we're still in a single-digit gross margin industry, all said and done. We need to get into teens and upper teens to really start cracking it. And again, it's a chicken and egg story. We need tech to get there, and then you need to attract talent to get into this sector and stuff like that. But I think we'll solve for it. I think, thankfully, the one thing which the tech people like about agriculture is the sheer opportunity, the sheer scale, which is unparalleled, right? And you can't have all other sectors of the economy growing at a different pace and leaving agriculture behind. I think it's a catch-up job right now, but it's a matter of time where you'll see tech solving for it. I think another interesting thing which I didn't talk about, agri-tech, for example, even country like India, of course, as it's a large country, lots of people, but you can be in 3-4 districts, you can be in like 100 villages, and you can still build $100 million business. You need not go all over the place to build a large business, and you can still build a sizable business. You can still list it. So I think that is another beauty, that there is no remote possibility of monopolization by large players. Like we see in other sectors. I don't see anyone saying, I'm going to dominate this space. Forget India, even if you can dominate one state or one value chain, that's good enough, which also is very unlikely. So what it means that you will have hundreds and thousands of winners, and hopefully thus creating much more opportunity for new talent to come in. For a lot of starters ask me, are we too late to get into agri-tech? I said, no, we still, the best is yet to come, and next 10, 15 years, probably the best window to get into this sector. So I don't know, it's a long answer to a question, but all said and done, I see that ultimately talent and opportunity and has to merge. and we have to fix that formula somehow. As an ecosystem enablers, I think we carry that ownership and responsibility to make that happen.
Oh, I can hear your passion and wanting to be part of solving for that, and you're right. I think there's very good reasons to solve for it at a different scale in terms of numbers of people. I think one of the strengths in New Zealand is that actually our technology innovators are still very closely attached with agricultural practice. That's the way our ecosystem works, and it's one of the strengths that New Zealand really has. So maybe there's a role there between some of the relationships and partnerships between technologist to technologists and representing that affinity with agriculture that some of our New Zealand innovators can bring as well. I look for, but again, I'm hearing a theme coming through that the timing is right, that actually that the ecosystem is evolving and the nature of opportunities and pathways to address them is changing in a positive way for potential collaborations based on what people might have seen before. We're still getting some really good questions coming through, so I'd like to pick a few of these, Hemendra. What do you think the biggest challenge is for New Zealand SMEs who have a technology solution when they're looking to tackle the agri sector? And maybe, I know that from previous discussions, you've been doing some work with Australia. Do you think there's lessons that we can learn from your experiences with Australia, which has some climatic conditions that that are very similar to India, that has a healthy agri-tech ecosystem as well that we connect with? How have you connected with that agri-tech ecosystem, and how does it help SMEs maybe find pathways for collaborations in India?
Yeah, again, a very good question. So yes, I think, and there are some really good success stories where relatively small companies from other parts of the world have come to India and have really found this market to be interesting. And I think 2-3 important lessons out there. A is that sometimes there's a pricing mismatch. What you are able to sell in New Zealand, you may need to look at your pricing for the Indian market, because there's some bit of price sensitivity, right? So I think it's important to understand that who's going to pay that price, right? And is that a large market for that solution? If not, is there a possibility to be flexible on pricing? I'm not saying you need to really go down. There are people who are willing to pay price, but sometimes I find it to be challenging for people in India to say, oh my God, this is going to cost this much. So if you have to really
some of that pricing is just real costs in developing a particular solution, and of course that pricing is adjusted or can be adjusted based on opportunity size, and and that's obviously a different dynamic for when you're looking at New Zealand as a market or even Australia as a market. It's different when you then look at India as a potential market, if there can be access to those numbers of farmers. So again, have you seen examples where Australian businesses have met that challenge and gone, okay, we need to look at structuring our business model differently for India?
Yeah, in fact, through ThinkTech only, we work with an Australian startup called Converte. They are into biostimulants, and they're a fantastic solution. And we worked with them and we introduced them to maybe about a dozen Indian companies, including some large companies, some startups. So it took them about couple of years to get into that kind of engagement. But as we speak, I think 2 out of those 12 odd companies we introduced are now partners with this Australian startup, who are sort of building technology collaborations and bringing this tech to India, and Indian partners using it and sort of distributing it among farmers and other communities. So there are examples where so I think the way it works, I think ideally one can look at a partnership approach, figure out who are the good partners, right partners, have exploratory discussions, demonstrate the uniqueness of technology, jointly build a business model, and one can work that out. I think there is a lot of openness to look at foreign technology. India is very open to adopt whatever works, but the solution should be relevant to Indian ecosystem. Is it solving for the challenges that we have? So I would say there's huge demand for, let's say, improving soil nutrition challenges, right? But solving for soil nutrition challenges. That's a huge opportunity area. A lot of demand for natural farming, organic farming, these bio inputs, because there is a lot of interest by the government and even private sector to invest more in eco-friendly technologies. Any solutions around solving for climate? I think those challenges are global, not just regional. So what you've solved in New Zealand, I'm sure, is going to make a lot of sense for India, right? So any solutions.
Yeah, that's obviously a driving force for many innovations and many challenges at the moment. So a specific question that's come up here and was on my mind, given the numbers of livestock in India, how much awareness or focus is there on methane and nitrous oxide emissions? Is that an area of focus and potential collaborations?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There is methane is one of the largest contribution towards GHG emissions.
Mm-hmm.
And we have almost 300 million cattle, 200 million cows and 100 million buffaloes. So there's a lot of methane emissions, right? Now, so any solution which can reduce it is going to make a lot of sense. Can you convert that into some sort of carbon trade, carbon credits is something we need to figure out. But I can tell you any solution in livestock. Of course, this is great example, solution to reduce methane emission. But any solution around genetics, around cattle nutrition, huge opportunity. Because even government is very clear that we need to reduce farmers' dependence on crops, right? And the best way to do it is to encourage animal husbandry, especially dairying, right? So to me, any expertise that you have on the livestock side, even if it's a small intervention in the value chain, is millions of dollars of opportunity in India.
Well, it's an area of significant focus for both New Zealand innovators, investors. It's existential. Livestock is makes up a very big part of our economy as well on a different scale, and so it's definitely a lot of innovation and investment going into that space. So that seems like a rich area to try and find some common purpose. I think we've been exploring this one already, but I'll ask it again just in case it brings up a different angle. Sort of given the tight margins, how likely are farmers to adopt a lot of the emerging technologies? And I guess we've explored the FPOs. We've seen, that maybe different price points might be needed, and different business models might be needed. But does that question drive any other thoughts for you in terms of that likelihood to adopt new technologies?
Yeah, again, a very good question. So yeah, adoption is improving. There are some studies which says 10% of Indian farmers have adopted some sort of new innovative technology, but the headroom is large. And I think if you look at a farmer is also an entrepreneur, right? He is not averse to technology, but it should demonstrate the impact in terms of economics. So either the technology should lead to saving of input cost, right? Like your soil testing solution, which optimizes use of fertilizers, right? Or it should improve their ability to earn more, right? So like this market linkage solution, which end up connecting you with multiple buyers, help in price discovery, stuff like that. Or it should help them de-risk their farming, given the challenges that we see, the price fluctuations, the productivity challenges, the climate challenges. So I think at least on one of these three dimensions, be it more income, saving of input cost, or de-risking of farming, you should pick off at least one of these three.
Yes.
And sort of demonstrate. And it's another important thing from an Indian farmer perspective that you can't say my solution will work from the third year onwards. No, it has to work in the first or the second season. He doesn't have capacity to invest, to get invested 3 years, right?
Too longer horizon, yeah.
We need a, so I think that's where, that's why a lot of these market linkage solutions scale very fast, because that cost benefit equation is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
It's happening, it's not happening, right? But in case of data-driven solutions, etc., that correlation is still easy. It may take some time to establish that equation. But I don't think farmers are averse to technology. I can tell you, like almost every other Indian farmer is on WhatsApp. They learn so much from the WhatsApp. Almost every third or fourth farmer is regular on YouTube. They're hungry for knowledge. They watch a lot of YouTube videos. There are a lot of rural influencers and farmer influencers. The farmer's son is pretty smart. He's very well connected to the rest of the world. The rural aspirations are not different from the urban aspirations, right?
Mm.
I think we need to create that magic and that formula which works with the farmer, and it boils down to economics. Can you say me $500? Can you say me earn another $1,000? What is that which I need to do? I think that promise has to have some sort of assurance. Yeah.
And real gain. I think that's similar for farmers everywhere. We've done quite a bit of work on adoption ourselves. And you mentioned in your presentation as one of the problems to be solved or areas is the sort of the agri fintech type space, and just the sort of, I guess, new methods of accessing capital, but maybe. Our own adoption research here in New Zealand has shown that the largest levels of adoption have been in sort of business management tools, which includes sort of, some farm management tools, but a large part of that is farm accounting packages, which have been, well supported by both farmers themselves, but also their accounting advisors or their farm advisors. And so that's been sort of the it's quite a fat end of the wedge now, but it started being the thin edge of the wedge. We've got about 70% adoption of those type of tools within New Zealand now, so very high levels of adoption. But when you're looking at fintech innovations and access to capital, what type of things are coming through there? And one question that's sort of leading into that is, is there sufficient capital available for both for the startups themselves and for farmers to have access to adopting technologies?
Right. So I think for startups, as I mentioned, we've got some amount of money recently, but we need much more. Typically, if you have to disrupt a sector, the last sector which got disrupted in India, like fintech, e-commerce, etc., the disruption happened at funding level of $30 to $50 billion. And we have got $3 billion. So I think we are at the start of the journey. Just to give you a contrast, one food delivery startup in India called Swiggy got a $5 billion funding till date, and whole of Agritech spread across 500, 600 startup got $3 billion, right? So that is a level of polarization of funding at the two ends of the supply chain. The front end is well capitalized, well funded. The back end or the upstream part of the value chain is still underfunded. So definitely startup need much more capital, no doubt about it, right? Whether farmer have money to pay, answer is yes. Answer is yes, because despite relatively low income, if that value proposition is strong enough, they do pay. They are buying the best of the input. They are paying for mechanization, right? And I think and government also has a very important program called priority sector lending to agriculture, where the farmers are given loans at about 7%, and that's a huge allocation for that. Hundreds of billions of dollars goes into that, right? So I don't think scarcity can be an excuse for not adopting technology. I don't think that's the case. It's about how, as a provider of technology, how strong is your value proposition. Because essentially it is not about any solution being expensive or cheap. It's about, can you give 3x or 5x of what farmer is willing to pay? Can that money or that cost translate into that kind of a benefit? I think that is more important.
Thank you, and thank you for handling a question that had two sides to it in terms of the access for startups and the access for farmers. Very interesting to hear about that. That there is government support with low cost finance. I'm guessing that some of that finance is geared at adopting technologies for environmental improvements. Are there other caveats or drivers that the government is trying to encourage with that access to low-cost finance?
Yeah, absolutely. Government is very clear. And thankfully, as part of a policy, government is very clear. Innovation is going to be the one key driver for growth of agriculture, right? And that's where you know the focus on lab to scale kind of solutions, especially a lot of interesting technology lying in the government laboratory is not able to scale because of lack of awareness, lack of accessibility. And that's where I think startups have a role to play because there is also a lot of entrepreneurial energy, right? And that's where I think, again, if you look at India's government structure, there's a federal government and there's a state government. Agriculture is the subject of the state government, right? So I think the state governments have to be really excited about it. And that's part of work I do with some of the multilaterals and foundation is to keep hitting at the state government level, talking to the right bureaucrats, telling them what agritech can do for the state.
Yes.
And the universal challenge for any state government is farm income, jobs in rural areas. So if you can prove that this is what agritech can do to a state, typically you get a warm reception, right? So yeah, I think it's so there's no sort of it's not one size fits all. It's a large country. So please don't take my any answer as a like a black and white answer. There are shades of gray.
You've you're excellent at helping. I'm aware that Kylie's popped up, and I'm also looking at the clock as well, which I know Kylie has been looking at, and we're beginning to get into topics that are just there's so much more depth to get into, and there's so many other questions that are coming through. So I think we are going to have to wrap it up here. But I'm left with both questions that are still on the screen. I'm left with questions in my own mind. So I'm looking forward to finding ways of continuing the conversation, Hemendra. Kylie, forgive me if this was on your list of wanting to wrap up, but I did want to make comment to any of our New Zealand members and audience that are here. I know that many members of the NZTE team have joined us, and they've got a lot of focus on India at the moment. And so if you're thinking about the Indian market, make sure you're get in touch with the NZTE team. If you need to do that through us, we'll be very happy to facilitate it. But otherwise, just give a direct reach out to that team. Sorry if I've stolen your thunder.
You did. I was about to add, when we do the follow-up email that has a copy of this recording, and we'll put in the links that Hemendra has discussed throughout the presentation that people can look at, and some contact details as well for people and the NZT team or information that might be available. And I also have to actually give a shout out to Anirban Dev, who was a huge thanks, who reached out and found Hemendra for us, and started this whole relationship in many ways. So thank you very much. I know he's watching. So and again, yeah, we've got all these questions. We had other questions that were submitted that we've been trying to sort of weave in, but if we didn't get to them, we'll go through and perhaps Hemendra might have an answer for you afterwards in an email or something. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. As I said, it's very hard to squeeze 28 years of insight into an hour and a half. So you did incredibly well, I have to say.
No, thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Kylie. It's a great opportunity for me also to learn about New Zealand, and you can. If you or anyone from New Zealand wants to learn about Indian agri-tech, Indian agriculture, they're most welcome. I also want to extend an invitation to all of you to come to India and see it for yourself. I think it's going to be a very interesting experience. So looking forward to work with you. I hope it's just a start of a long journey, but I must say a very rewarding journey, which I can see in collaborating with each other. And once again, thanks a ton for this lovely opportunity to talk to you, talk to other members of your alliance. It's great. Thanks a ton. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hemendra. I really must say I've really enjoyed the conversation and really appreciate both the depth of your knowledge and your obvious passion in this area as well. It's a fantastic combination. So thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. See everyone. Have a good time.